Imagine this. You're standing in a room filled with voices, but every word floats like smoke, light, weightless, vanishing the moment it's spoken. People talk, not to connect, but to fill space. Recycled stories, second-hand opinions, the weather, a celebrity scandal, the same safe conversations circling like birds in a cage. You wait, you listen, you hope there's a window in the noise, a pause, a space to offer something that might actually matter. And when it comes, you speak, not loudly, not to impress, but because you thought, maybe, just maybe, someone here also wants more, a deeper question, a challenge, a glimpse beneath the surface. But instead, you get a pause, an awkward smile. Someone clears their throat, and the moment is gone, buried under the next joke, the next headline, the next escape from anything real. You feel it, don't you? That sharp, sinking sensation. They didn't hear you, not truly, not in the way you meant. And so comes the quiet decision. Maybe it's better if I just stay quiet. If this resonates, you are not broken. You are not arrogant. You are not cold. You're just alone in a way no one talks about. Because here's the truth no one tells you. The more your mind opens, the harder it is to find someone standing at the same depth. And the loneliness that comes from that, it doesn't sound like crying. It sounds like silence. The kind where you stop sharing, not out of fear, but out of exhaustion. You start to wonder if you're the problem, if you're difficult, if you're too intense, too abstract, too deep. But maybe the truth is simpler and more painful. Maybe intelligence doesn't unite us. Maybe it separates, not because we want to be distant, but because the world grows thin the moment you start seeing through it. And if you've ever wondered why you feel out of place in a world that seems so sure of itself, stay with me, because what comes next might explain everything. You'll see why intelligence doesn't just set you apart, it sets you outside. Why clarity can feel like a curse, and why the more you understand, the harder it is to be understood. But there's also something else, a reason not to give up, a way to carry your mind without letting it bury you. Let's begin. You don't get to unknow, you don't get to go back. And from that moment on, every room feels a little too loud, every topic a little too empty, every laugh a little too rehearsed. The disconnection isn't your fault. But it is your responsibility now, because once your mind starts searching for meaning, you stop being satisfied with noise. It sounds logical, doesn't it? That being intelligent, truly intelligent, should make life easier. You grasp concepts quicker. You detect patterns most people miss. You avoid mistakes that others walk straight into. On paper, that should be a gift. But in real life, that very gift becomes a wall, not a wall you build. A wall that rises slowly, invisibly, every time your thoughts stretch beyond what others are ready to face. And one day, without warning, you realize you're on one side of that wall, and most of the world is on the other. You speak, and they nod, but their eyes glaze. They smile, but the topic shifts. They laugh, but not because they understood. You're not saying anything extreme. You're not trying to provoke. You're just honest, observant, engaged with reality in a way that refuses to be shallow. But here's the truth. Most people don't want that kind of honesty, not because they can't handle it, but because it disrupts something fragile. It breaks the spell. Society isn't built on truth. It's built on cohesion, on agreement, on people smiling through contradictions just to keep things moving. Truth, real truth, is uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people are inconvenient. That's why the world doesn't reward deep thinkers. It avoids them. It celebrates charm. It rewards simplicity. It elevates those who say what everyone already believes, but question too deeply, expose the illusion, and suddenly you're difficult, you're intense, you're a threat. Schopenhauer didn't dress it up. He said plainly, the more clearly you see the world, the less it wants to see you, because most people aren't looking for reality, they're looking for relief. So when you speak truth, you don't just share information, you disrupt emotional comfort. You rattle the scaffolding holding their peace in place, and no one thanks you for that. Instead, they retreat, they ignore, or worse, they smile politely and never invite you back. Not because you were wrong, but because you made them feel something they've worked very hard not to feel. So you learn, bit by bit, to speak less, to smile more, to keep your observations to yourself. And in that silence, a subtle pain grows, not because you're misunderstood, but because you've stopped trying to be understood. There's a quiet tension that enters the room when you say something real, not cruel, not arrogant, just real. It doesn't matter if it's said gently. It doesn't matter if it's meant to help. The moment your words stretch beyond the script, people shift in their seats. Why? Because most people can tolerate strength. They can admire physical power. They can envy money. They can even accept beauty, fame, or influence. But when they sense a sharper mind, a mind that sees beneath surfaces, that notices what others pretend not to, they don't feel awe. They feel threat, not because you hurt them, but because your awareness reflects their limits. And no one wants to see that mirror. It's not your insight they resist. It's the discomfort of having their illusions exposed. And that discomfort doesn't announce itself. It arrives masked, as defensiveness, as sarcasm, as "you're just too much." It arrives when someone says you overthink, when your seriousness is called negativity, when your quiet is mistaken for judgment, because your presence forces something raw into awareness, that their beliefs might be borrowed, that their confidence might be hollow, that their reality might be curated, not created. And no one likes being reminded of that. This is why the intelligent rarely inspire casual affection. They're not relatable, they're confronting, even in silence, even without trying, because intelligence doesn't shout, it reveals. It doesn't have to prove itself. It just is, a slow-burning truth that makes others suddenly question their place in the room. So what does society do with that kind of energy? It moves away from it. It labels it complicated, difficult, detached. It reduces it to something manageable, a quirk, a flaw, an excuse to avoid going deeper. But the real reason is simpler. Intelligence reflects, and reflection is painful. It shows how small the conversations have become, how automated the routines, how numb the dreams. It whispers, you've settled, you've stopped questioning, you're playing a role you didn't write. And in that whisper lies the danger, not because you said something wrong, but because your very presence says there's more. And for those who built lives around avoiding more, you are the storm they didn't see coming. At first you try, you really genuinely try. You shape your words more carefully. You trim your thoughts before you speak. You learn to read the room, to measure the limits of what people are willing to hear. You bend your depth into something smaller, something lighter, something they can hold without flinching. And at times, it works. They laugh, they respond, they stay, but it never feels real, only tolerated. You walk away from those conversations with a weight you can't quite name, like you've left pieces of yourself scattered between the pauses and the pleasantries. And over time, a pattern forms, not because you make a decision, but because something in you gets tired. Tired of shrinking, tired of pretending not to care, tired of masking your intensity just to make others comfortable in their smallness. So you start to retreat, first from certain topics, then from certain people, then quietly from entire rooms. Not because you're bitter, not because you think you're better, but because showing up fully has started to feel like an act of self-erasure. You realize that being included often comes at the cost of being understood, and the price of constant translation of your mind, your voice, your truth is too steep. So you withdraw, not loudly, not dramatically. You just stop explaining yourself. Stop trying to be felt in places that don't want to feel. Stop chasing resonance in echoes that only repeat the same shallow sound. You begin to value the quiet, not the silence of suppression, but the peace of not having to dilute yourself. And in that quiet, you rediscover your center, your pace, your thoughts, uninterrupted. It's not that you hate people. It's not that you've given up on connection. It's just that you've stopped asking for water from wells that always run dry. You'd rather walk thirsty alone for miles than beg one more person to see you clearly. And so, little by little, you choose solitude over noise, depth over approval, truth over inclusion, not because you're cold, but because you finally realized there's nothing lonelier than being surrounded by people who can't meet you where you are. At first, solitude feels like salvation. You finally have space to think, to breathe, to stop folding yourself into boxes that never fit. No more diluted conversations, no more forced agreement, no more pretending. There's relief in that, a kind of stillness. You wake up and no longer feel the pressure to perform. You speak only when it matters. You surround yourself with quiet things, books, music, thought, and for a while, it feels like clarity. But the mind, especially one as deep and restless as yours, doesn't sleep in silence. It turns inward. It expands without boundaries. It runs loops that spiral, from questions to theories, from insights to existential weight. And without a mirror, without another mind to meet you halfway, your thoughts begin to echo, louder, denser, heavier. What once felt like peace now starts to feel like pressure, a loneliness that doesn't come from others, but from living too long in the echo chamber of your own brilliance. You begin to overprocess. You dissect moments no one else remembers. You chase meaning in patterns no one else sees. And somewhere along the way, you stop reaching out, not just physically, but emotionally. You become guarded, careful. Your inner world becomes sacred, not because it's whole, but because it's the only place you've ever been fully understood. You laugh less, not because life is sad, but because the things people laugh at don't move you anymore. You respond more slowly, not because you don't care, but because you're running everything through a labyrinth of thought before answering. And people, they start to fade. You don't push them away. They just don't know how to stay. Because the space you live in now isn't on the map. It's a place made of nuance, of shadow, of questions without neat endings. You still walk among the world. You still go to dinner, answer texts, play your part. But internally, you're orbiting elsewhere, not lost, but far. So far, in fact, that even you forget how to come back, because solitude, when left unchecked, can turn from sanctuary into sentence, and no one will see it happening, because from the outside, you look fine, maybe even strong, wise, independent, but inside, you're trapped in a house of thought with no doors and no visitors. And you're not sure anymore if you chose this, or if it slowly chose you. You start to realize something quietly terrifying. You were never meant to belong, not because you're broken, not because you lack social skills, but because the world wasn't designed for minds like yours. From the earliest years, you're taught how to sit still, not how to think freely. You're rewarded for compliance, not curiosity, for memorization, not meaning. Schools teach you how to pass tests, not how to ask better questions. Jobs train you to maintain systems, not to reimagine them. Even friendships often prefer entertainment over insight. And society thrives on consensus, not complexity. It's held together by shared illusions. The belief that happiness comes from achievement, that authority equals truth, that success is measured in likes, titles, and timelines. But deep thinkers, they interrupt that flow. You question the rules, not to rebel, but because they don't make sense. You resist groupthink, not to stand out, but because it feels dishonest. You spot contradictions, not to be difficult, but because your brain won't let them slide by. And the world does not reward that. It flinches from it, because when you think freely, you break the spell. And the spell is what keeps everything running. Schopenhauer saw it clearly. The further one moves from common thinking, the more isolated they become. Not because others are cruel, but because they've been conditioned to fear the unfamiliar. You become the outlier, the over-analyzer, the one who makes things complicated. You suggest a new way of seeing, and people call it too much. You challenge a popular belief, and they call it an attack. Not because your ideas are wrong, but because they require effort, mental, emotional, existential effort. And effort is exhausting to a society that worships ease. So what does the system do? It trims the edges. It polishes you down. It tells you to smile more, relax, just enjoy life. It turns intelligence into a personality flaw and depth into a social inconvenience. And if you resist long enough, it leaves you alone, not dramatically, not as punishment, but through slow, subtle exclusion. You become the one people appreciate from afar, but rarely invite too close. The one whose ideas are quoted, but whose presence is a little intense. And the irony? This same world that shrinks away from your mind secretly relies on people like you, because nothing ever changed without someone who refused to conform. There's a point of no return. Once you see the cracks in the system, you can't unsee them. Once you realize how much of life is performance, you stop believing in the stage. You hear people celebrate their victories, a raise, a relationship, a new car, and instead of joy, you feel a strange distance, not because you're bitter, but because the applause feels hollow. You want to believe in it too. You try, but your mind is too awake now, too aware of the illusion. You see the race, the exhaustion, the endless reaching for things that don't fulfill, and while others cheer, you're wondering if any of it truly matters. That's the burden no one warns you about, that knowledge isn't always empowering. Sometimes it isolates, it pulls back the curtain, and what's behind it isn't beautiful. As Nietzsche said, when you gaze long into the abyss gazes back, and that gaze changes you, not with violence, but with silence. The silence of realizing you may never see the world simply again. So what now? If understanding isolates you, if truth strips away belonging, what's left? Schopenhauer believed the answer isn't to retreat in bitterness, but to stand taller in solitude, not as punishment, as purpose. You stop seeking comfort where only illusion lives. You begin building from within, writing, creating, thinking freely, not for applause, but for integrity. You don't need the world's validation to be whole. You just need alignment between what you know, what you feel, and how you live. And yes, you may walk alone, but those who walk with truth rarely walk in crowds. If this spoke to you, don't let it end here. Leave a comment, not just for me, but for the others watching in silence. The ones who feel what you feel, but don't yet have the words for it, because sometimes the smallest sentence can be the start of someone else's awakening. And if you're tired of pretending, if you're ready to think without shrinking, then subscribe to the channel. There's more. You're not alone in this.